On Saturday, we went out to sea on our first practice run on a patrol craft, which was about 170 feet long and had a crew of 60 men and 5 officers. The PC's job was to escort cargo ships and troop transports and protect them from U-boats. The commanding officer was a lieutenant named Chris Foss, and he introduced us to the ship while we were still tied up to the dock. "Think of it as a sort of mini destroyer," he said when we all gathered on the dock. Woody and I had been assigned to the same ship, and as usual, he was standing right next to me, like he thought we were under orders to literally stick close together. "These PCs were designed for one single purpose, and that's anti-submarine warfare," Lieutenant Foss said. He was above us on the bridge. "Most of you will be assigned to a PC once you finish your training, so no better time than the present to learn everything there is to know." He tapped the rail. "This baby can trail a U-boat at its maximum speed, and it's got the Navy's best sound equipment. A PC is more maneuverable than a sub, and it presents a small target for a sub to evaluate, so there's less chance of a PC catching a torpedo, which should mean a greater chance of a PC catching a sub." Woody elbowed me. "Sounds like he's trying to sell us a car," he whispered. A petty officer was standing behind us. He leaned close to Woody's ear and hissed, "I'll be having words with you later, sailor. Now shut it while the captain is talking." I thought Woody was going to faint. I inched away from him, wishing I'd been standing next to somebody else. Lieutenant Foss was explaining all about the PC's 2 diesel engines, how seaworthy it was, and how it was possible to practically spin it on axis near the mast. He said the ship was designed so that in rough seas it could right itself even if it rolled 110 degrees, which would mean the ship would be almost upside down and still not capsize. That was kind of hard to believe. I'd been on a lot of boats and in some very big waves, but I'd never seen anything like that. Then he stopped for a minute, maybe to let us absorb all the information he was giving us about the patrol craft, or maybe to change the subject. "You will hear people, good Navy people, refer to the patrol craft fleet, and all of you who will serve on a PC, as the Donald Duck Navy. Small ship, thin hull, limited firepower, but what you will be doing is no joking matter. And how well you are trained to do it is something your instructors are dead serious about. Dead serious because if you don't learn everything about anti-submarine warfare, stone cold, eat it, sleep it, breathe it, you and the ships and the people you are sworn to protect will end up at the bottom of the ocean." He paused again while we all looked at one another, wondering what he was going to say next. "U-boats are not true submarines," he continued. "They are warships that spend most of their time on the surface. Their deck-mounted guns are more powerful than yours will be. They can submerge for limited periods, but they can do a lot while they're there. They can travel anywhere from 60 to 100 miles underwater at a time to attack our ships, evade our pursuit, and escape the bad weather that will neutralize your effectiveness, but not theirs. A U-boat crew can clear its bridge, close hatches, and dive to periscope depth in 30 seconds. Half a minute, and they're ready to fire a 20-foot-long torpedo at you or at one of the ships you are sworn to protect. That means after a U-boat sighting, you have even less time than that to get to general quarters. In order to attack that submarine when you see it submerged, instead of just dodging its torpedo, or worse, watching helplessly as it sinks another ship in your convoy, you must be able to scramble to general quarters in 25 seconds. You will begin training to do this." He paused to set his stopwatch. "Right now." And at that, a klaxon horn sounded in the call to general quarters. We had been assigned a post already. Mine was loading 34-pound shells into the 3-inch 50 caliber guns just below the bridge. Woody's was in the engine room, so we all took off and immediately started running into one another, knocking each other down, blocking somebody else's way. Guys were screaming at one another so loud that nobody could hear anything. The officers roared at us and shoved guys this way and that way, but we couldn't seem to get anywhere. And I was only trying to make my way about 10 feet from where I started. Maybe it was because I was so small, but the jostling forced me closer and closer to the edge of the ship until I was clinging to the rail to keep from going over the side. And the next thing I knew, A couple of big guys slammed into me and I lost my grip. Over I went, 20 feet down and straight into the water. I'm not sure anybody even noticed. No horns sounded, no whistles blew. I knew that much. I found my sailor's cap and stuffed it in my pocket and swam over to the dock, though it was hard going in my work shirt and dungarees and boots. By the time I hauled myself out and walked the gangplank back to the patrol craft, everybody had miraculously found their way to wherever they were supposed to go, except me. My boots made a squishy sound as I navigated over to the deck cannon and the pile of shells I was supposed to help load for us to fire at whatever U-boat might have been on the attack. Lieutenant Foss glared at me from the bridge, as if he thought I'd deliberately jumped in to go swimming. I felt guilty, even though I knew it wasn't my fault, but there was no way to explain. 5 minutes, he said. That took 5 minutes. Congratulations, you're all dead. I found out later that Woody didn't do much better down in the engine room, 2 decks below and as far as you could go on the ship. 12 guys packed in there like sardines at first. Only as soon as Woody got there, the engine room chief ordered 8 of them to turn around and make their way back topside to load depth charges. He gave Woody some kind of order that Woody couldn't remember. And when he told me about it, because when the chief said port side, he went starboard instead, hit his head on a pipe and knocked himself out. The next day was a Sunday, but instead of going to chapel, Woody went off somewhere by himself. He didn't tell me where, but I didn't mind having a few hours to myself. I went to chapel and prayed for Mama and Danny and everybody else on Ocracoke. The minister had us all pray for our troops and ships fighting the Japanese out in the Pacific. He let us pray for the poor Soviet people in Leningrad, which were surrounded by Hitler's army and under siege. It was threatening to fall like every other city in the Soviet Union had fallen to the Nazis. Finally, he had us pray for the British tank forces who were battling the German army under Field Marshal Rommel for control of North Africa and not faring very well. So far, we'd been sending supplies and weapons and food to England and the Soviet Union under President Roosevelt's Lend-Lease Act. But people were still wondering when America and the Allies would be able to launch a counterattack against Germany and Italy, a full-on invasion to take back France and liberate the rest of the European countries that Hitler had steamrolled with his blitzkriegs. Right now, England was the only holdout besides the Soviets, and it didn't seem like either one of them could hold out much longer without our help. Meanwhile, the German U-boats kept sinking more and more of our cargo supply ships along the East Coast, down the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. I was lying on my bunk that afternoon thinking about all that, missing Mama and Danny and home, when Woody came back from wherever he'd been. It didn't take long to get it out of him. He rolled up his sleeves and showed me. On his right forearm, he'd gotten a tattoo that said starboard on his left arm, and he had one that said port. Should have done this a long time ago, he said, rubbing the bruise on his forehead where he'd run into the pipe. Now I know which direction is which. I'm ready to go hunt down some U-boats. And we'll pick up with chapter 11 next time. Happy Friday, y'all.